We are in the book of Daniel this morning. This will be our last class for Daniel. I hope that you've been enjoying this study, and I certainly am. Definitely thankful for the men that stepped up and taken a chapter when I was out of town as we were going through this book. And I want to thank Mark Fitzgerald. If you were here last week, Mark taught for me. He really wanted to teach chapter 11, and when someone jumps at a really difficult piece of scripture, I'm kind of like, you want it? You got it, man. If you're here, it is chapter 11. It is long. It is very it's a winding road through history, and there's things you have to see in there, and dates you have to know, and all of these things. And so I thought Mark did a fantastic job of just taking us through that. He did a better job than I could have with all of those names and dates and battles and all of that stuff. And if you want a great just top to bottom rundown of chapter 11, go back and watch last week's class, and you'll get it. Chapter 12, the last chapter in Daniel, chapter 12. Continues the revelation that started all the way back in chapter 10. All right, and so we're just going to pick it up right in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 12. It says this. So the angel has said all of these things, right? Like, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, then this person's going to rise up, and this person's going to backstab them. And then it says, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been seen since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. So, it starts off with at that time. Now this can be a little confusing because we, in our Western English speaking mindset, we like to look at things in just as they are in sequential order, right? And think that, okay, when this happens, then the next thing that this person says, well, that will happen then, and then the thing that after that is going to happen after that. Not necessarily. That phrase there, at that time. You would think that, oh, okay, that sounds sequential, right? So then after all of these things, then this thing is going to happen. Well, not necessarily. At that time just means in that era or in that age. And as is very common, or can be very common in Jewish writings, they like to say something and then explain it and then say it again in a different way. So chapter 12, Mark ended his class last week with talking about these last verses in chapter 11 are kind of question marks with them of we don't know. Not to mean that they are inaccurate, but we just don't have the information available to us to be able to clearly see, oh, this is talking about that, and this is that person, and stuff like that with what we saw, in the main portion of chapter 11. Chapter 12, there's a lot of that going on, okay? Some of it has to do with, is this a dual fulfillment prophecy? Is this a retelling or just a summarization of the things that were talked about in chapter 11? Or is this really a far off view of, oh, these are the things that are going to happen way off in the future towards the end of the world? It says, there shall be a time of trouble, unlike any other time, since there was a nation till that time. And this could be talking about, can be applied three different ways. Could be talking about the persecution of Antiochus Epiphanes. It could be the fulfillment of the events in AD 70 with the destruction of Jerusalem. And due to the language of verse 2, which we're going to get here in a second, some see that this is the destruction of the world at the second coming. It is possible, though, that verse 1 has multiple applications to it. Remember, Daniel was inspired by the prophecy of Jeremiah about the 70 years. That's the whole thing that kicks all of this stuff off, right? Daniel's like, I heard about the 70 years, give me some insight on this, and then we get this whole story about how the angel was delayed at getting to him, and all of these things that we want to know about who the Prince of Persia is, and stuff like that. But Daniel knew that the time was approaching. It was fast approaching, and it was then that a messenger of God came to interpret the vision that he had seen. The overall message was not the specifics of all the history covered in chapter 11. The message was that the ultimate triumph of God's people would not rest in the temporary return to Jerusalem. He had something greater in mind for them. The latter half of verse 1 talks about the book. It says, but at that time your people shall be delivered. That sounds great, right? We get some positive news here. Everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. This is the book of life, mentioned many places, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, and it always refers to God's faithful people, which that fits with the context, right? That the people shall be delivered. In fact, and then when we get into verse 2, then I think that even becomes more clearer for us. Verse 2, it says this, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Verse 2, now this is language that gets our attention, doesn't it? We start thinking about zombies, right? People bursting out of graves and walking around. Or, more likely in this context, what's going to happen at the end of time. A resurrection of sorts. Now, I think there is a way of interpreting this in Daniel's time and in ours. I think it has both a short view in mind and a long-term view in mind as well. If you consider, many of you are probably familiar with Ezekiel and his when he sees the vision of the dry bones, right? When he sees the dry bones in the desert, and then he gets information about that. That's in Ezekiel chapter 37. Ezekiel says something very similar to what Daniel was just told here. In Ezekiel 37 verses 12 and 13, it says, therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people. Now, we get chronicled for us in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah how these people start going back to the land. In both of those books, we're never told that there are zombies that are walking amongst them to go back and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. That's not what is being talked about here. That's not what Daniel's being told, and that is not what Ezekiel is being told to prophesy either. He's talking about their return to Jerusalem. Ezekiel is. He's talking about a resurrection of dry bones here, metaphorically. Could these graves be opened up, also be talking about their return? And it could fit this context. Maybe the angel is going for some dramatic flair here, which would not be uncommon with how we see angels, deliver messages to us mortal people here. That it's a sense of you are thought of as dead, right? You are a conquered people. You are living in exile, and God is going to raise you back up and bring you back, and that is the sense of like the nation is coming back alive at that point. Once again, though, this could also be pointing to Antiochus Epiphanes. You're going to hear that name a lot this morning. And I'm sorry for that, but it is a main point in history for the Jewish people, and was specifically just prophesied about in chapter 11. Those who take this view of the war between the Jews and the Romans or the Greeks, imagine Jews hiding in caves and then coming forth as a free nation, whereas the Seleucid armies are utterly defeated. That's what it would mean by, in some, to shame and everlasting contempt. It could also, though, be pointing to the resurrection on the last day. The doctrine of resurrection was not fully developed in the Old Testament, but this would match what Jesus said in John 5, verses 28 and 29. It says, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment." That fits with what Daniel just said, right? Some will go to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. At the end of the day, right, well, which one is it? It could be all of these options. Okay, like I said, we've talked about the concept of a dual fulfillment prophecy before, that it is something that is fulfilled in a limited sense in that time, and then is fulfilled in a greater sense in a time later. I don't believe we can be dogmatic when we view these things of, it has to be talking about that because we live in the time that we do and we see history as we look back at it, and it could be either. It could be both, right? In verse 3, it continues on. "And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." These are the wise among God's people. It says, "Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above." Wise and foolish are often put at odds with each other in the Old Testament. Not a lot of you are a sinner talk going on then, but a fool. This is foolishness, or you are considered a fool would be what we see written a lot in the Old Testament. The wise being on the other side of that. The wise are the righteous. The wise are the saved. The wise are the obedient to God and His law. These wise are among God's people who keep His covenant despite even persecution, and they influence others to do the same. God's people are compared to the stars in the sky above. I believe this is both an encouragement to shine as lights in a dark world, which Jesus would go on to say something very similar to that, of shining our lights in a dark world. And it also would be a promise of a future glory, of the thought of, consider what is waiting for you. Consider the reward that is waiting for you if you stay faithful. In verse 4, he says, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." The word here, the phrase here, "shut up the words," does not necessarily mean to hide them. It means to protect and preserve them. And it says that until the time of the end. Well, what does that mean? Could that be, again, it's either the time up to till Antiochus Epiphanes, when he desecrated the temple in 167 BC, or the time up to the end of the Jewish age in AD 70. But he says that they will be going to and fro, right? Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. This is the opposite of what Amos says in Amos 8 verse 12. It says, "They shall wander from sea to sea, from the north to east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, but they shall not find it." This is a message of judgment that we read here in Amos, right? That even if they wanted to find this knowledge, they're not going to find it. But in this case here in Daniel, we see the exact opposite. That they're going to run to and fro, they're going to try to find the answers, and knowledge will increase. They will find the knowledge. And perhaps some Jews, what is in mind here? Perhaps some Jews are going to study the prophecies that Daniel has written out here. That they're going to see it, and they're going to see these prophecies unfolding before their eyes in real time. I mean, imagine that, right? We in our day, so often, people try to find, the signs and the Bible code in order to see things happening in real time. The people that were living during all of the things that happen in chapter 11, when they're reading Daniel, I mean, they can just read it like a playbook, right? I'm going like, oh, all right, well, that just happened, and it's not, this like, ambiguous language. Chapter 11 is pretty specific with how it talks about how these things are going to happen, and that would have been incredible, right? Of thinking like, oh, wow, like we're living in this time. Granted, it also is a time of, destruction and, really bad things going on. And there, it would not be I don't know, maybe some people would be like, oh no, we're starting this point of chapter 11 and it's going to get worse. Ay, ay, ay. But hopefully, and I think this is the entire message of chapter 12, that it's going to be bad, but something greater is waiting for you on the other side of it. And maybe they would take that as encouragement for them. That they would read Daniel and be able to go, okay, this is going to be bad. This next thing is even going to be worse, but there's something greater that's going to wait for us on the other side. They would see these prophecies unfolding before their eyes. They're going to run to and fro, and knowledge is going to increase because of what Daniel has written in his book. That is we get a little breather here in verses 5 and 6 of, all of the angel said all of this stuff. And I would imagine if I was Daniel, my head would be spinning. Of just like, oh, slow down. In verses 5 and 6, we get a little pause here, a little break. It says, "Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others stood, one on this bank of the stream and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders?" Remember, way back, Daniel is beside the Tigris River. And this messenger, right, we get the description of him, and he's terrifying, but he's also said that he's clothed in linen. This is the one who is speaking to him, the one that was delayed by the prince of Persia. And it seems like we have a couple witnesses here now that show up, and they ask, how long? How long till the end of these wonders? Wonders makes it sound kind of fun, right? Right? um, but the word is the same word used back in chapter 11, verse 36. And in the context, it's talking about judgment, right? It's talking about indignation. And that same word is used here in verse 6. And so wonders is, don't get confused by that and go, oh, it's happy things. It's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. It's talking about the destructive deeds of this evil leader. And we can guess that the same subject matter is being discussed here. In verse 7, it says, "And I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished." We see the angel raise his hands. This is common in our age, right? You raise your right hand as you're taking an oath, or swearing allegiance to something. The angel raises both hands. And we have some witnesses there, so he is making this testimony before them. He says, time, times, and half a time. That is 3.5, right? This is a symbolic number that represents extreme persecution or trial. This is not the first time that we've seen it in Daniel. In fact, if you look back in chapter 7, verse 25, Daniel says, "He shall speak words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and shall be given into his hand for time, times, and half a time." This is talking about some extreme persecution or trial. And again, this is either most likely talking about Antiochus Epiphanes or AD 70. Verse 8, it says, "I heard, but I did not understand." I feel like we could all say that at this point. "I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" Daniel didn't understand. I mean, realistically, we're looking at it in 2026, looking backwards, and we have all these historical accounts and these documents, and we can look at chapter 11 and go, that happened there. Okay, that matches up here. Daniel's on the other side of it, right? He's looking forward, and he's being told all of these things. He's like, what's going to be the outcome? He didn't understand. How could he? The angel is talking about events that are going to occur hundreds of years in the future, and he asks, what will be the outcome? Perhaps Daniel's beginning to understand here that the angel just told him all of these things with the intent that Daniel is going to write them down, not necessarily completely understanding what he was writing down, but he was told to do it and to preserve that word for those who would come after him. In verses 9 and 10, it says, "He said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand." The message is, keep yourself pure. Don't compromise. It's a very similar ending to how the book of Revelation ends with what is being told to John. In Revelation 22, verse 11, it says, "Let the evildoers still do evil, and the filthy still be filthy, and the righteous still do right, and the holy still be holy." Daniel's at the end of his life here. We imagine he's in his 80s, which during this era was, I mean, it's in your 80s, that's older for our day. And it would be incredibly, incredibly old in Daniel's time. Daniel has experienced a lot, and still in his old age, he is being told, go your way. Remain faithful, regardless of the circumstances. Don't get too bent out of shape about those in rebellion against God, because there's always going to be those in rebellion against God. There's always going to be godlessness on the earth. In verses 11 and 12, it says, and from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. At this point, I believe the angel is just toying with Daniel. Okay? Daniel's like, what does it all mean? And the angel's like, just be patient, be faithful. And then he hits him with this at the end. It's like, yeah, let me just throw some numbers at you here real quick, which is, I don't know, I find it kind of humorous. 1,290, that is roughly 3.5 years. Okay? It's hard to interpret these numbers. If you look at any commentator, they get to these numbers and it's kind of like, why is there two numbers? 1,290 and 1,335. What's the deal here? It's hard to ascribe a symbolic reference to these numbers as well. Christine, did you have your hand?
Yeah, I'd like to take it that maybe it's okay being late.
It's okay being late? He's saying, blessed is the one who comes 45 days later? So you got 45 days and you're still blessed. 46?
No.
You're done. It's hard to interpret these numbers. Most believe that this is in regards to when the temple was desecrated in 167 BC, and then 3-ish years later the temple is cleansed. If it's that, then maybe the 45 days after that, besides it being cleansed, then maybe 45 days later is when the sacrifices were reinstated at the temple. Others see this as this additional 45 days is when Antiochus Epiphanes finally dies, after the temple is cleansed again. Like I said, it's hard to arrive at this is exactly what this means, but this is what is told, and this is what Daniel records for us. In verse 13, last verse of the book, it says, but go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. Angel gives him some numbers that he doesn't understand. And then in verse 13, he again reaffirms and re-encourages him. Don't worry about it too much. Don't worry over matters that you can't control. God is going to take care of them. Ben?
Well, Amos specifically talks about kind of a godly knowledge. Could Daniel be referring just to worldly knowledge increasing rather than Amos's, godly knowledge diminishing?
Perhaps. You're talking about like, could he, that, as time goes on, people are going to search and they're going to, there's going to be new inventions and, yeah.
I remember reading a book, 5,000 Year Leap. In the last 100 years, we progressed previous generations took 5,000 years to get up to horse and buggy, you know? It's just, I don't know, it's just,
And I mean, if you take that view in mind of, you know,
Talking about a more modern day interpretation there, then that would fit with a more end, like the end view in mind. Sure. But Daniel's told, right, I think it's interesting, but it's also often the way that we see God work. That Daniel was very concerned at the beginning of this with, I was reading about these 70 years, God. Tell me exactly, you know, when did that start and when is it going to end and how all of this stuff was going to happen. Was Daniel ever told the answer to his question? Not really, right? You know, it's fuzzy, right? Not really. But at the end, what he is told is, if you stay faithful, you're going to be with me. Because for God, that's really what matters. We get bogged down with all of the stuff down here. And we need to know, God, why did you allow that? Why is this going on? What is the inner workings of providence and how God is working in our lives today? Daniel doesn't get his answer. At least not the way that I would want my answer to the same question. He's told, go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. Daniel survived a war. He was captured at a young age and brought into a foreign land. He served in both high and low positions under at least 4 kings. And if you think about the entire story of Daniel, besides the things that, you know, can get us bogged down, you look at the lessons that we gain out of this book, and not just the, you know, this is a really fun coloring page for kids. But we start off seeing Daniel abstaining from food, seeing that faithfulness in small compromises prepares you for larger acts of courage. We see Daniel interpret the first of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, and God reveals God reveals what human knowledge never could. We see Daniel's compatriots in the fiery furnace, showing that faithfulness does not always keep you from the fire, but God walks with his people through it. We see Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, and when he's restored from that dream, that God humbles the proud until they recognize who's really in charge. We see the writing on the wall, and understand that a kingdom can appear powerful on the outside while already standing under God's judgment. We see Daniel in the lion's den. After a lifetime of consistent faithfulness, God gives courage in moments of crisis. We see Daniel as the man of prayer, showing that public faithfulness is sustained by private devotion. The overall lesson from the prophecies, besides trying to understand them, the earthly kingdoms will rise and fall, but God's kingdom alone stands forever. I wanted to end our class with that same video that we watched during the introduction, because so often when we get into the minutia of the books, we kind of lose the overall story and the overall message of what God is trying to show us through this. And so we're going to watch it. It's 8 minutes long, and hopefully that will bring to mind the things that we've studied. Hopefully some of the things in the video now make sense, and will give you a much more long-term view of what do I do with this information now. Let's watch that video.
The Book of Daniel. The story is set right after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, and they had plundered the city and its temple and taken a wave of Israelites into exile. Among them were 4 men from the royal family of David: Daniel, who's later named Belteshazzar, and his 3 friends who you probably know by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book tells of their struggles to maintain hope in the land of their conquerors. The book's design seems pretty simple at first. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends in Babylon, while chapters 7 through 12 contain the visions of Daniel about the future. But this two-part shape is made even more interesting by another design feature, and that's the book's language. It begins in Hebrew, the language of the Israelites, but chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, a cousin language to Hebrew spoken widely among the ancient empires. But then in chapters 8 through 12, it goes back to Hebrew. This design shows how chapters 2 through 7 are a coherent section, but it also highlights the importance of chapters 2 and 7 for understanding the later chapters of the book. Let's just dive in. Chapter 1 introduces the basic tension of the first half of the book. Daniel and his friends, they're really wise and capable, and they're recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. But they're pressured to give up their Jewish identity by living and eating like Babylonians and violating the Jewish food laws found in the Torah. So they refuse, and they choose faithfulness to the Torah, and it puts them in danger. But God delivers them, and they end up being elevated by the king of Babylon. After this begins the Aramaic section, which you'll see has this really cool symmetrical design. So first, the king of Babylon has a dream that, it turns out, only Daniel is able to interpret. It's about a huge statue made of 4 types of metal, and it symbolizes a sequence of kingdoms, and the head is Babylon. But then a huge rock comes flying in, and it shatters the statue, and it becomes this huge mountain. Now, this dream is the first of many symbolic visions in the book, and this one introduces the basic storyline of them all. Daniel says that the statue represents a train of human kingdoms following from Babylon, and they will all fill God's world with violence. But one day, God's kingdom will come and will confront and humble the arrogant kingdoms of this world and fill the world with the healing justice of God's reign and rule. After this, chapter 3 tells the famous story of Daniel's 3 friends who refuse to bow down and worship a huge idol statue, which, like the statue in chapter 2, represents the king and his imperial power. And so the friends are persecuted. They're thrown into a fiery furnace, but God delivers them from death, and they're exalted by the king, who now acknowledges their God as the true one. After this come a pair of stories about 2 Babylonian kings, the father, Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, Belshazzar. They're both filled with pride because of their imperial power, and so, like in chapter 2, God warns them both through dreams and then visions, which, also like chapter 2, only Daniel can interpret. He says that both kings are to humble themselves before God, and both kings arrogantly resist. So Nebuchadnezzar is stricken with madness. He becomes like a beast in the field. But then he humbles himself before God, and his humanity returns to him. He's restored as king. This is in contrast with his son, Belshazzar, who doesn't humble himself before God, and he's assassinated that very night. Now, these 2 stories draw this imagery from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and Psalm 8, where humans are depicted as the royal image of God. He's given them authority to rule over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air on behalf of God, who is the world's true king. But when human kingdoms forget that, when they rebel and make themselves and their power into a god, they become less than human, like violent beasts who will face God's justice. Which brings us to chapter 6, the pair of chapter 3. And this time it's Daniel who's being persecuted because he refuses to pray and worship the king as a god. And so, like the friends, he's sentenced to death and he's thrown into a lion's den. But God delivers him from the beasts, and like the friends, the king exalts Daniel and praises his God, which brings us to chapter 7. It's the pair of chapter 2 and the center of the book where all its themes come together. It's another dream, but it's Daniel's this time. And ironically, he can't understand the dream until an angelic messenger explains it to him. He sees a series of 4 beasts, one like a lion, then like a bear, then one like a winged leopard, each of these symbolizing an arrogant kingdom. And last of all is a super beast, identified as a really evil empire, and it has lots of horns, a common symbol for kings in the Old Testament, and there's one specific horn who is an image of an arrogant king who exalts himself above God and persecutes God's people. Now they are symbolized by a figure called the Son of Man, who's an image for both God's covenant people, but also for their king from the line of David. But then all of a sudden, God, who's called the Ancient of Days, comes and he sets up his throne. He destroys the super beast and he exalts the Son of Man on the clouds, where he comes up to sit at God's right hand and share in God's rule over the nations. We can look back now and see how all of these stories in the first half fit together. The three stories of faithfulness despite persecution, these are meant to offer hope to God's suffering people among the nations. But they suffer because human kingdoms have rebelled against God and have become beasts. And so these visions encourage patience, that God's people are to wait for him to bring his kingdom and rule over our world and vindicate his suffering people. But it raises the question about when God is going to do that, and that's what these final three visions set out to explore. In chapter 8, Daniel has another vision about the final two beasts of chapter 7, but this time they're symbolized by a ram, who we're told is the image of the empire of the Medes and Persians, and then by a goat, who's an image of ancient Greece. And out of the goat come a whole bunch of horns, one of which symbolizes the evil king from chapter 7. And we're told more about him, that he will attack Jerusalem and exalt himself above God and defile the temple with idols. However, in the end, he will be destroyed by God, who will exalt his people and his kingdom. Now, by chapter 9, Daniel is very puzzled, especially as to when all of this is going to take place. And so he consults the scroll of the prophet Jeremiah, where God said that Israel's exile would only last 70 years. So for Daniel, the 70 years is almost up. And so he asks God to fulfill his promise soon. But an angel comes and informs him that Israel's sin and rebellion has continued. And so their time of exile and oppression will continue on 7 times longer than Jeremiah envisioned. Daniel is deeply disturbed by this, and he has one final vision. We're shown the same sequence of kingdoms. It's Persia, then Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the north, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and exalt himself above God. But then, all of a sudden, this king comes to ruin. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still others think it will be fulfilled in future events that have yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. But it opens up the possibility that in a sense, they are all right. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus's empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's visions and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong, and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about.
Isn't that nice? It all makes sense now, right? It brings it all full circle. Well, I want to thank you for your attention over these last few months as we worked through this book that maybe you've probably heard the headlines before, but maybe haven't actually really dug into it. I hope that it was encouraging to you and edifying to study God's Word. Let's pray, and then we will be dismissed from our class this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for these past few months as we look into your Word. God, it is truly incredible to see your Word not only as true and accurate to history, but also as an encouragement to us as we read it and we recognize your glory and your authority and power over all things. God, we know that you are still alive and alive today and have that same amount of authority and power. And God, I pray that we would recognize that and subject ourselves under your rule and be obedient to what you have explained to us in your scripture. God, please be with us as we enter into a time of worship. God, help us to focus on what we are doing. Help us to sing out songs of praises to you that you so rightly deserve. God, help us to learn from your word again this morning, and help us to encourage others around us as well. We love you, and it's in your Son's name that I pray.